Um, as we've heard, there's been a number of reports published recently looking at the quality of careers advice in schools, and today's report is a very welcome addition. As we've heard from Louis, it's certainly data rich, and our reading is that it presents clear evidence that careers provision in schools is getting worse. But it balances that by providing some really practical recommendations at how we can improve performance. So we at the CBI certainly welcome today's report. But I think we should be honest and admit that there's never really been a golden age for careers advice in schools in England. Over the years there's been various systems tried, some better than others, but none has been truly effective. And whilst this has always been important and should always have been a matter of real concern, I think this matters today more than ever because, as Graham has touched on, the challenges we currently face as a country are huge. So we've got around 2.5 million people out of work. The number of young people out of education, employment or training is hovering around the 1 million mark. If you add to this the fact that competition for jobs has never been tougher, and the fact that young people these days need to prepare themselves for the fact that they may have a variety of jobs in a variety of sectors over their working life, you know, young people are facing more complex decisions than ever before. And it's clear that the school to work transition isn't working. I think we all agree that a high quality, impartial careers advice and guidance system must be a vital part of the solution in better managing that school to work transition. But this won't be achieved without strong and sustained business involvement. We know that input from business can help ensure that careers advice is much better grounded in the realities of the labour market. And also business has a key role to play in educating and inspiring young people about working life and about all the options that are available to them. And make no mistake, companies want to get involved, and many are. But what we really need, and I was chatting earlier, what we really need are the right mechanisms and incentives to make it happen in a much more comprehensive and effective manner. So we want to see the provision of careers advice and guidance as part of a bigger framework for improving that school to work transition. And this means restoring work experience for 14 to 16-year-olds and rewarding those schools who help young people develop that real deep understanding of the workplace. And really there I've summarised the three sort of key themes or key points that I want to make this morning, which are firstly, that careers advice and guidance isn't delivering for young people. Secondly, that any attempts to improve the system will fail without strong employer involvement. And finally, that careers advice and guidance piece must be part of a bigger framework about improving that school to work transition. So as we've heard this morning, high quality careers advice is essential in helping young people make that jump from school or college to work. With the right careers advice delivered on time, at the right time, more young people will have a better understanding of the world of work and of the full range of options and routes that are open to them. But it's not currently working, and employers know this. CBI and Pearson run an annual education and skills survey, and the survey for this year, for 2013, shows that improving the quality of careers advice is one of the top priorities for employers. I think, as an aside, the top priority is actually the need for more work experience and more focus in schools on developing those workplace skills, and perhaps we can touch on that in a minute. But on careers advice and guidance, we know that current provision isn't up to the mark. So only 1 in 20 businesses across the UK feel careers advice is good enough. The vast majority, around 3/4, tell us that careers advice and guidance must improve. And even though we're focusing today, and Pearson's report focuses on careers provision in schools in England, it's probably worth remembering or noting that employers report similar concerns to us to the same degree about the quality of careers advice in Scotland, in Wales and in Northern Ireland. In terms of specific weaknesses, our own research in CBI has identified a number of weaknesses with current provision, and this includes the fact that it's often irrelevant and not timely. it fails to inspire, it's not accurate and not grounded in the realities of the labour market, and there's often a real absence of advice around vocational pathways. And I guess it's reassuring that, well, reassuring in terms of the accuracy of our research, that the recent Ofsted report agrees, because the Ofsted inquiry into careers provision found that in many of the schools inspected, the provision of careers advice failed to inform and inspire, was not set in the context of labour market reality either nationally or locally, and failed to provide adequate information on vocational options. So the system is failing, but it's not just failing for young people, it's failing for the taxpayer, who has to pick up the cost in terms of paying for the publicly funded skills system, and it's also failing for employers, both in terms of accessing a skilled workforce, and also because they have to invest huge sums in education skills and training programs. And I think this takes me to my second point, which is that attempts to improve the system will fail without strong employer involvement. So we believe that this is essential, as business involvement is key to ensuring that advice and information is inspiring, relevant, and most importantly is grounded in the realities of the labour market. And businesses of all sizes, in all sectors, are ready to step up and play their part. Again, the CBI Pearson Skills Survey shows that already over 80% of businesses have links with schools and colleges, and of these around 2/3 are working with schools either directly or through national schemes to inspire young people about career paths and career options. And employers are ready to do more, but this willingness needs to be encouraged and recognised and promoted by government. So I note that recently ministers stated that the best motivation in careers advice come from people in jobs, and have called on employers to offer more to schools and colleges. Well, absolutely great. But this needs to be matched by an accountability framework which incentivises schools to build those relationships with business and which recognises and rewards the best schools. I think, again, as Graham touched on, the recent commitment from Ofsted to ensure that inspections take greater account of careers provision is clearly a step in the right direction, but we need to go further. In Louis' introduction, he touched on the recommendation in today's report that there should be a governor on governing bodies in schools with responsibility for careers. It might just be worth mentioning here that this isn't a setup. There's some areas where we disagree, and I think that's one area where we're not persuaded by that recommendation that schools should have one governor drawn from a business background who takes responsibility for careers work. I think for us, the role of a school governing body is akin to a corporate board. It's a strategic role. So governing bodies should provide strategic direction and leadership, they should monitor and evaluate performance, assess progress against key targets, provide challenge to the leadership team, and ultimately hold the head to account. It's a strategic role. The role of the governing body shouldn't be to micromanage or to interfere in the day-to-day running of the school, and that includes the provision of career advice. Don't get me wrong, we must have governing boards which are more business-like, and this means attracting more men and women with business skills and experience to serve as governors, but appointing one governor to take responsibility for careers seems to undermine that principle of collective responsibility that's essential for a well-governing body. But I know this issue is quite a hot topic, and I know it's one that Graham and his committee have recently looked into. It's also an area of interest to CBI and its members, which is why we'll actually be publishing a report next month on governance and leadership, which will look at the whole issue of how we can make governing boards more business-like, and will also sort of come down clearly on either side of the fence on this point about governors taking responsibility for careers provision. But back to careers, another area where we think business involvement is crucial is around ensuring that vocational options and pathways are properly explained and signposted. The duty to provide impartial and independent advice must mean that all young people receive advice and guidance about the full range of options that are open to them. And this must include vocational routes, vocational options. But we know that these are often undersold as an option for young people. Again, the recent Ofsted report highlights this and highlights the extent to which schools promote vocational training and apprenticeships. So we want to ensure that the perception that A-levels and university, are the only route to a successful career are challenged. And again, we think through involvement in the delivery of careers advice and guidance, businesses are well placed to help counter any negative perceptions about vocational pathways and ensure that careers advice cover that full range of options that should be available to young people. And this takes me to my third and final point, which is that careers advice must sit within a framework for improving the school-to-work transition as a whole. We at the CBI continue to oppose the government's decision to remove the statutory duty on schools to provide work-related learning. We've always believed that this would result in a decline in work experience, and I think this is now evidenced by the recent Ofsted report, which showed that I think 2/3 of the schools visited had cut down on their work experience provision for students in years 10 and 11. So this should be a key concern. We know that work experience can be a fantastic opportunity for young people to make those links between what's learnt in the classroom and what's required in the workplace. And in fact, from an employer's perspective, work experience is the single most important factor in getting young people ready for the world of work. And this is one reason why businesses support schools and colleges by providing work experience for students. Again, the CBI Pearson Skills Survey shows that of those employers that have links to schools and colleges, over 80% offer work placements. And this is up from around 70% last year, which we believe is an indication of increasing concerns amongst employers about the level of school leavers' workplace experience. So employers support that school-to-work transition in a number of ways. Yes, by providing careers advice and talks, but also by providing work experience and giving young people a real insight into the world of work, by helping young people develop those behaviours and attributes that are required for success at work, those so-called employability skills, and also by promoting and taking part in schemes which inspire and encourage study in particular subjects that are much in demand in the workplace. And we see many great examples of this. So for example, there's the business class programme, which is run by an organisation called Business in the Community, which builds partnerships between schools and businesses. And there's currently over 200 such partnerships right around the UK involving businesses of all shapes and sizes. There's also the Life Skills Project, which is being created by Barclays, which aims to give around 1 million young people access to the skills and information they need to make good career choices. And also, I know we've got Nick here today. Nick's responsible for the Inspiring the Future initiative, which encourages people to go into schools to talk to young people about their experiences and inspire young people about their potential in the future. And I think in its first year, volunteers from around 2,500 employers put themselves forward to go into schools. So there's a real willingness from industry to get involved, but the absence of a clear framework for involvement is a major barrier. As we've heard, there's some good business-led initiatives which are bringing some structure to this issue, but the lack of incentives on schools to engage with industry remains a key concern. As we've heard, many schools have cut back on their engagement with industry following the abolition of the requirement to offer work experience, and the Ofsted report found that links with employers were the weakest aspect of careers guidance in all of the schools that they visited. So whilst we agree with the government that employers, schools and colleges should work in partnership more, this needs to be reflected in the performance and accountability frameworks within which schools operate. As we've said, the recent commitment from Ofsted to ensure that inspections take greater account of careers provision is clearly a step in the right direction, but we want to see more. We want to see that statutory duty on schools to provide work-related learning restored. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to nominally chair a Q&A session here, hopefully. I'll take them in pairs. Please do put a question mark at the end of them. We've got up to half an hour, despite the late start. And I will try and take some questions from anybody remotely via Twitter, if you could help me keep an eye on any interesting questions later. But who wants to start us off, please? Any questions from the floor? Got one there at the back. Yep.
Okay, my name's Edward Morgan. I used to be at the BBC, now based in a small company. This is just a quick question. I'm struck with what the panel say about making informed choices at key stages. There's lots of the work being done by Nick and people in the select committee talks about character, trendy words, character, resilience, grit, controversially recently. To what extent can better provision give young people a sort of better attitude and energy and that ability to bounce back from setbacks, which is also as key as just making skillfully passive informed decisions?
Great. One more question for this round. Anybody else?
I noted that in your recommendations you didn't specifically say anything about impartiality, and I think that's a key area and was just interested that it wasn't one that you highlighted.
Great, sure. Okay. Either of you want to take perhaps the first question? I'll answer the second.
Well, I mean, the area where grit and character would most come in, I think, is through work experience of getting out there, and hopefully through work experience being inspired, either inspired to make sure you never end up in a job like that, or inspired to think how an industry like that, wherever it is, would get you going. So I think, but it's, you know, the broad extracurricular experience is one of the issues, and I think work experience is part of that extracurricular line. Just very briefly on impartiality, our report was very strong on that. We are obsessed, I think rightly, with incentives within the system and the way it drives behaviour. And you know, if you have a sixth form and you're up against sixth form colleges with better results and greater choice, the tendency to restrict information and guide everyone towards your sixth form is pretty immense. And therefore the very idea that a school in that position could be impartial, I think, is fundamentally unsound.
Perhaps I could respond to the first question. I mean, within the CBI we've been running a schools campaign for around sort of close on 12 months now, and part of what we're calling for is the development of those behaviours, those characteristics, those characters around resilience and enthusiasm and creativity and respect to be sort of mainstreamed into the learning. So those behaviours aren't going to be developed through the careers talk, you know, or through careers advice and guidance. They're going to be developed by having them embedded into the way in which young people are taught and developed in our schools. So there's a much bigger piece there that requires a change of what we're asking schools to deliver.
On the question of impartiality, it definitely didn't make it to the top 8 recommendations, nor did lots of other things, most notably funding. Somebody at the DFE thanked me personally for not putting funding in the top 8. But in those cases and all the other cases where things didn't make the cut, that was usually because we just didn't have strong enough data. Impartiality was a kind of thread that ran throughout the questionnaire that we put to people. So we did try and, within that, the 44 activities, some of those are labelled as impartial, so they were choosing, you know, is this impartial advice or is this advice from a non-qualified careers advisor, that kind of thing.
So you were asking them, are you biased? And they said
no.
Well,
we did then ask them. I mean, the challenge is that we were asking people who are actually delivering this in schools. So yes, we did ask a question, is your school best placed to decide the career support students need, and do you provide impartial advice? And on both of those, they thought they were very well placed, and they were even more convinced that they could provide impartial advice. So I think that kind of answers the question in terms of how you create incentives within the system. I think everybody, with the impartiality question, I think people believe they are impartial, but maybe you need to design the system around that. But yeah, I'm just rereading page 38 where there is a small section on independence, but hopefully the data across the 44 illustrates impartial versus non-impartial kind of activities. Yes, that's the answer to that one.
I mean, it must be a key principle, because again, if you look at the Ofsted data and where the destination of some of those young people in the schools inspected, there wasn't an even spread across, say, academic and vocational pathways, and that's a key concern to CBI and employers, that in some schools, in some places, young people aren't being given the full range of options. There's that default mechanism, which is GCSEs, A-levels, 3-year degree, and that's not right. It's not right for all young people. It's not delivering the skills that employers need. So impartiality must be a core principle.